A biomechanical analysis of the standing volleyball float serve. The volleyball serve is a closed skill. Volleyball players have the option prior to the serve on deciding to initiate the feed as well as when to make the connection. Volleyball players are capable of dictating the accuracy and power of the serve. Corrections can be made on technique to achieve the most optimal serve, but more importantly, the biomechanics of the serve. Some variables in volleyball serve range from the importance of understanding torque, center of mass, angular and linear velocity, impulse momentum, angular kinematics, Newton's 3 laws of motion, acceleration, projective, and range of motion. Serving the volleyball can be performed in a number of variations, which include jumps, standing, or underarm. However, the serve of the volleyball can be manipulated to perform different ball spins. For the purpose of this presentation, we will be covering the biomechanics of the standing float serve. The standing float serve is one of the most fundamental movements and skills in the game of volleyball. This type of serve has the ball deviate and alter direction mid-flight, making it difficult for the opposing team to determine where the ball will land. In this clip, Coach Donnie demonstrates the proper orientation and progression of movements when performing a standing float serve. Both the upper and lower limbs are assisting in setting up the serve. Proper positioning is imperative as it will assist in transferring momentum and generating a larger amount of power, which will ultimately produce a successful serve. The ankle, knee, hip, shoulder, wrist, and elbow joints are all used in the standing float serve. The initial starting position of the serve begins with feet flat on the ground in an L or V shape, with the majority of the server's weight placed on the back foot. The non-dominant shoulder is flexed with the wrist and hand remaining low while supporting the ball. Scapular retraction pulls the dominant arm backward to cock the arm. The elbow flexes and the wrist remains in a neutral position. The deltoid, coracobrachialis, and the clavicular head of the pectoralis major act together to raise the shoulder as the ball is thrown into the air. As the ball is tossed upward, the server takes a step forward, engaging the hip flexors, hamstrings, quadriceps, tibialis anterior, soleus, and gastrocnemius. This step transfers the server's weight to the front foot. The back foot and ankle plantar flex, the knee flexes, and the hip extends. As the ball descends, the dominant shoulder extends and the wrist remains in a neutral position. The hand makes a contact with the ball and the elbow extends as the arm follows through the serve. The 5 phases of the float serve are start position, ball toss, acceleration, ball contact, and follow through. Prior to the serve, the server must find his or her optimal starting position. Some starting positions vary dependent on the comfort of the server. In this case, the server seen here has a foot stance shaped in a V. Here, the left foot of the server is externally rotated facing the service line. From here, the non-dominant hand should be used as the feeder with a 90-degree angle in the elbow as a trunk and torso open up through the drawback phase. The other arm should be raised beside the head with the shoulder abducted at 90 degrees. This ready position gives the player a great opportunity of generating efficient accuracy, acceleration, and velocity in the push movement. The next phase is the ball toss, which is labeled as a push-like movement pattern. This is because the joints extend simultaneously in a single movement. To successfully make the toss, the player will throw the ball straight up until the arm is fully extended. The still image here displays this action. In this stage, the player's ball toss must start low to increase the force that will be applied to the volleyball. The stationary volleyball will have no momentum when held by the player's non-dominant hand because it does not have velocity, but it will still have inertia. Applying a force to the volleyball by tossing it up will change its momentum. Aiming to hit the ball at its highest point will be influenced by the toss, which is highly influenced by the arm swing movement. The ball is tossed up in the air by what is usually an athlete's non-dominant arm. Newton's 3rd law states that for every action there is a reaction, which is applicable to the gravity that pulls the ball back down. If the ball toss is too low, too high, too far in front, too far back, too far left or right, this will force the player to chase the ball. The next stage involves the player bringing the dominant hand back to serve the tossed ball. Once the volleyball has been tossed, the player's dominant arm will go backwards with their hand close to their ear. Newton's 1st law is applied here in volleyball float serve, as the dominant arm will continue to move with consistent velocity as long as the net force equals 0. If the elbow is bent when completing the serve, the moment of inertia will decrease in the arm, which will lead to a faster angular velocity. This will have a result of a fast serve, making it difficult for the opponent to accurately hit back. The image here displays Newton's 1st law with the arrow indicating the bend in the elbow. If the elbow was not bent, when the moment of inertia would be too large to successfully complete the float serve. The body will begin to rotate as the shoulder and elbow moves into an extension as they aim to hit the ball. Once the ball has reached its highest point, the player will accelerate their arm forward as fast as possible. Increasing the arm acceleration will have a result of an increased velocity, which leads to a greater momentum. Aiming to increase momentum will enable a greater ball trajectory as the player positions themselves to make a higher contact with the ball. As this occurs, the leading hip, trunk, and shoulder move into rotation and followed through by the elbow, wrist, and hand. The kinetic chain is known as a sequence of joint rotations to translate mechanical work through joint constructions in order to allow movement in dynamic tasks. The volleyball float serve is an open kinetic chain movement as the segment furthest away from the body is free and not fixed to an object. It is important to note that during the acceleration phase of the standing float serve, there is torque at key points on the player's body. The image here displays torque occurring, which is the energy expressed during the rotation movement. Torque is needed through the torso, hips, and shoulder to successfully serve the ball to the opponent. This is equal to torque, moment force, T equals F times D, where D is the moment arm of force. Greater force from the serve will result in a greater torque. Therefore, increasing the force will increase the amount of rotation. In order to serve the ball with power and speed over the net, torque is needed and rotation needs to occur. In order to accelerate the ball faster than it is falling, a larger force must be applied to it. This force is transferred to the center of the ball by the palm of the athlete's hand as seen in images here. The equation to measure the amount of force is mass times acceleration. Momentum needs to be transferred from lower body to upper body in order for a greater force to be applied to the ball. This is because greater force equals greater power. The coefficient of restitution in relation to the float serve describes the capacity of the ball to retain energy after hit by the athlete's palm. To achieve the high coefficient of restitution, the ball would have bounced off the hand as strong as possible as shown in the figure here. The placement of the hand when meeting the ball can impact the ball trajectory. When the ball hits the palm of the hand must be firm and strong in order to avoid creating topspin on the ball and to maintain a high coefficient of restitution. Contact between the firm palm and the ball must be brief or the transfer forces will not be most effective. These forces are created when all muscles and joints move together in the correct sequence, all building up to create its maximum potential force. The proximal to distal sequence describes the movement process between the shoulder to the fingers. It is the movement chain between the shoulder rotating forward, the forearm and the wrist falling over while the straightening of the arm, which locks the elbow in straight position as seen in referring back to figure 2. After the player has successfully made contact with the ball, the next phase is to follow through. This movement will end with their hips and trunk facing the net. Through this phase, a range of mechanics are required to successfully follow through. The follow-through is completed using a proximal to distal sequence using a push movement. The ball will have potential energy when it is elevated in the air throughout the peak of the release. Also, the height of the ball combined with the force of gravity will determine how much acceleration it will have when it falls and how much kinetic energy it gains before being hit. This means that the higher the ball, the more potential energy and less kinetic energy it will have when falling. More kinetic energy will be released once the player has hit the ball. The images have here showed the demonstration of energy released when completing a float serve. When completing a float volleyball serve, the player's center of mass won't change significantly. This specific point represents a mean position of the matter in the player's body, which is also known as the center of gravity. The center of mass can be influenced by the player's height, limb proportion, and radius of gyration. Therefore, it will vary between players. At some point, volleyball athletes will face some sort of injury in their career. Volleyball injuries are defined as either acute or traumatic, or overuse or chronic injuries. Acute and traumatic injuries occur when the body is faced with a sudden impact or force, such as falling from a jump or twisting of a joint. Overuse and chronic injuries occur over an extended period of time, where the body has been put under continuous stress without proper rest. Common volleyball injuries include ankle injuries such as sprains, pulled tendons, or fractures. Shoulders include dislocations or strains. Finger injuries are suffered through dislocations and tendon tears. Knee injuries such as ACL, fractures, and dislocations are also common, as seen in figure 14. Volleyball players' muscles, bones, and joints need to be able to handle the force that is applied when completing a serve, mainly as the athletes are likely to complete a significant number of serves each match and training. Athletes must be strong enough to apply force and energy to the ball without injuring their body. An example of this is the importance of bending the elbow during a serve, Without the proper bend, the force of the serve could shock joints and cause injury. Strengthening the muscles can be done to prevent an injury from occurring. The muscles that are dominant in the float serve include the biceps, triceps, pectoralis, deltoids, and shoulders. Having flexibility through the torque will also prevent injury, as movement is required through the torque when performing the serve. There is no torque in the shoulder or core. This can significantly increase the chances of creating injury. Another contributing factor to avoid injury would be not overextending through the back of the rotation stage. These are the major contributing factors that could cause a shoulder or elbow injury. Other technical errors can have impact also.